Battle of Poitiers. Chapter 8. Weapons. A knight carried many weapons into battle. His most important weapon was his sword. Early swords were flat and wide. They had two sharp edges. They were called slashing swords. Armor did a good job of protecting knights from the sharp edges of slashing swords. So sword makers started making swords that were longer and more pointed than slashing swords. These swords were called thrusting swords. The point of a thrusting sword could fit between the steel plates or through the mail rings of armor. In the later Middle Ages, some knights carried swords that were so long and heavy they couldn't hold them in one hand. These were called hand-and-a-half swords. Hand-and-a-half swords could be nearly as tall as the knights who carried them. A knight's lance was nearly as important as his sword. A lance was a very long pole with a sharp steel point on the end. A knight on horseback held his lance in one hand and galloped toward his enemy. When he got close enough, he tried to stab his enemy or knock him off his horse with the lance. Yikes! Sometimes a whole line of knights charged at an enemy with their lances. Knights had plenty of other weapons, too. A flail was an iron ball and chain attached to a handle. The ball was covered with sharp spikes. A mace was a big club with a heavy steel head. A blow from a flail or a mace could crush a knight's helmet and the knight's head inside. Knights also fought with battle axes and war hammers. Battle axes had short handles and broad, sharp blades. A war hammer was like a big hammer, a club, and a knife all in one. Shields. Along with their weapons, early knights also carried very large shields. The shields helped protect them against the weapons of their enemies. As armor got better, the shields got smaller. By the late 1400s, most knights did not carry shields into battle at all. They only carried them in special contests. These contests were often the biggest events of the year. They were called tournaments. Turn the page to attend a medieval tournament. This way. Tournaments. Tournaments began as practice for war. Knights fought each other in big teams. Their battles were called melees. Melees were very confusing. There were hardly any rules. It was hard to tell which team was winning, so tournaments began to feature two-man contests. The most popular two-man contest was the joust. In a joust, two knights tried to knock each other off their horses with lances.